Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this virtual professional development opportunity. My name is Joe Schmidt. I am the Social Studies Specialist for the Maine Department of Education. Today, I am happy to welcome back, I don't know if this is Crystal's second or third webinar. She is one of my teacher leaders, both formally as a past participant in my teacher leader cohort learning, and informally as somebody that I reach out to and say, hey, are you willing to share your expertise with the field? And Crystal definitely meets all these definitions of expert and expertise and teacher leader. And right now my goal is to just make everybody aware of how awesome she is, because she's about to knock your socks off. So today she's going to talk about integrating books and other texts into social studies. Crystal is a 6th, 7th, and 8th grade teacher at Strong Elementary School, where she teaches both ELA and social studies at MSAD 58. So without any further ado, I will turn it over to Crystal.
Good afternoon, everybody. Hopefully everybody can see my slideshow up on the screen here. If you can't, just shout out. And as Joe said, as we go through this, please make sure that you feel comfortable using the Q&A or the chat box to ask questions, and Joe will relay those as we go along. So the overview for this afternoon is that I'm first going to try to make some connections between social studies and reading, just as a review of how connected those two subjects are. Those are the two subjects that I teach. I have a dream job, so I'm able to integrate all of the time. And then we'll review a few strategies that I'd like to share with you. And those are basically a review of some cooperative learning techniques. We'll look at some online resources that I thought might be helpful, especially those of us who are continuing to teach a little bit remotely. And then I have some books that I would like to share with you. And then at the end, I would like to have a discussion so that you feel comfortable sharing some of your resources. So first off, comprehension. So the things that we do as reading teachers that really focus around comprehension, which is the definition of reading, really are the same things that we strive in our social studies classrooms for, in terms of getting our students to do these things and practice them repeatedly. So we're talking about monitoring, metacognition, using graphic organizers, answering questions, generating questions, and recognizing the structure of the text and summarizing. So these same things that we're using in the reading classroom and continually having our students practice are the same things that we're using in social studies. So 7 strategies of highly effective readers. These are things that we strive for in our social studies students as well. Activating, inferring, monitoring, clarifying, questioning, searching and selecting, summarizing, visualizing, and organizing. And this is just a graphic to hit that point home that here are the things that we use when we're getting our students to think like a historian. And you'll have this PowerPoint if you want to look more deeply at it. I'm just providing you with an overview before we have our discussion here. Some books, professional development books that helped me as I was preparing for this professional development. They are pretty new to me, so I haven't read them word for word, but I'm finding them really helpful resources. So this one is one called Reading to Make a Difference, Using Literature to Help Students Speak Freely, Think Deeply, and Take Action. So this is a book that I found really helpful, and it has great book lists as well as lesson plan ideas. Cultivating Genius, an equity framework for culturally and historically responsive literacy. This is an amazing book. And if, especially if you teach middle school and high school, I think you would really enjoy this book. This is a quote from that book about literary societies in the 1800s. That was the beauty of these spaces. They were intellectual spaces where reading, writing, debating, listening, meaning making, questioning, all of these literacy practices happened across discipline areas. So I'm finding that book has really been inspiring. And then this is where I found a lot of strategies that are traditional cooperative learning strategies. The title of the book is 50 Strategies to Boost Cognitive Engagement. And what I really like about this text is that it tells you what the strategy looks like, and it's all aligned and organized to Bloom's taxonomy or depth of knowledge. And it tells you what it would look like across curriculum. So in a social studies classroom, what would this strategy look like? And so now I'm just going to go over some of those that I have found really helpful very recently. I've tried these out in my classroom in my reading or social studies classes. Okay, so as I said, I like this because of the structure, how it's set up. So 4 corners, we're probably all really familiar with this. So in terms of in a classroom where you're using text, it doesn't matter whether it's a novel or an article, fiction, nonfiction. So you could use this with pre-reading or as students are reading. And I'm finding that during this COVID time of mask wearing, my kids need an opportunity to get up and move. And so 4 Corners has been a great way when the gym is free for me to use that space and do this activity where kids can get up and move. And of course, the way that 4 Corners works is that you have 4 different options and kids go to the option that they feel most connected with. I'm looking forward to trying this 3rd one here, which I haven't tried yet, but the book recommends something like which of the 10 amendments in the Bill of Rights could be removed with the least amount of impact. And then you use a large space to have kids make choices. Ranking order. This one really spoke to me because the section that I was reading was about using songs, and I do a lot of music activities in my classroom. So the one that really stuck out to me was an economics piece where you had kids come up with songs that had to do with economics. And they just gave 3 examples: Tax Man, Take the Money and Run, She Works Hard for the Money, and come up with whether these songs are good for teaching sales tax discussion and which one is best and why. So ranking order in some way when kids are learning about or reading a certain text. Questioning protocols. And again, using questioning protocols repeatedly, consistently with students we know increases engagement and learning. And so in both a reading class and a social studies class, you're focusing on getting students to identify details, making inferences, making global connections, and getting them to both answer questions, but also write their own questions. Okay, so a couple of ideas that came from the book. After reading a section of the book, have the students write 7 to 10 questions for the author that would help an illustrator create a detailed picture to represent the text, or having students individually generate 10 questions for a historical figure or for a character, and then have to work together in small groups to select the best question. Inferencing and reviewing. So at this point in the slideshow, I connected some of my Google documents to the PowerPoint so that you can use them if you wish as templates. And I found having them in Google Docs really helpful since I'm teaching so much with Google Classroom these days. So for inferencing, using a graphic organizer, doesn't have to be anything fancy, but what you're getting at is teaching the difference between explicit and implicit information, and then giving students the opportunity to express their opinions. I have posted all of my literature circle templates, which provides a structure for reading text. And usually we use those with novels. They don't have to be fictional novels. They can be nonfiction, but they provide a structure. So I posted all of the different templates I use for the jobs, as well as the descriptions for the students of what the jobs are. Bio poems are a great way for students to creatively respond to a text, and they can be used not just necessarily with a character, they can be used with a historical figure. And I tend to use them a lot because kids feel pretty comfortable with the structure and they enjoy that structure. So I put that template up there for you. My template for my book reviews that I use with kids, and then creative shares. And I like to assign creative book projects. So many years back, Angela Lake, who I think is here today, she and I did some brainstorming about different book project ideas. And I've just held on to those and continue to add to them. So there's a list here of, let's see, 60 ideas to creatively ask students to process what they've read. And kids get to choose what they would like to do for a project and then present it to the class. So that's just kind of helpful to have a list of creative ideas that kids can use to process what they've read. And jigsaws, of course, I try to use as much as possible. We know that that's a very effective way to increase student knowledge. And recently we read the World War II novel Between Shades of Gray, and we did a jigsaw about different partisans, and kids were in different groups learning about different ways to fight back. And we read the book We Fought Back, which is an Alan Zillow piece. We used a technique that I call novel in a day, where with the Ellen Zillow books, they're kind of broken up into different sections, different people. And so each student was assigned a partisan to research. And I love Ellen Zillow books because they have a really rich introduction that all students read, and then you can break them up easily into different groups. And I find that kids really love that they don't have to read the whole novel, but they are going to contribute to the class. And I think it also helps them learn and develop a sense of community because they know that people are relying on them to share their part of the book. So we recently did a jigsaw with that piece, but you can do jigsaws with all kinds of things, historical maps, economic data, anything that's connected to your particular topic or content.
Crystal, a question.
Yep.
Do the bio poems run the risk of being in the category of pretend you are an enslaved person assignment?
Not for me. I have not ever used it with my slavery unit.
Okay.
So that has not been an issue.
And then a follow-up, what are the effective strategies to teach students how to determine fact from fiction when reading historical fiction?
A lot of practice with that. And I find that when I'm doing a historical fiction piece, that I need to spend a lot of time pulling out some really high quality articles so that they have the opportunity to dig deeply and make sure what they're reading is factual or not. So I think a lot of practice with that is the best way to go. And a lot of conversation about what makes a good website, what makes a factual website. And I think at middle school, you just keep practicing that and trying to make sure that they're using the best possible sources.
One other quick question. I don't have the answer because I haven't seen this before. The Thinking Like a Historian poster that you showed earlier, I had never seen that version, and somebody wants to know where that they could purchase that or possibly find it online.
Let's see. I will have to go back and look. I don't remember off the top of my head, but I will make sure I look that up.
Gotcha. If you send it at any point, I can add that into the website with the rest of the presentation.
Okay, I will definitely take care of that by this evening so that you can include that in there.
And that is all the questions at this time.
Okay. So Think, pair, share. This is a traditional cooperative learning structure where you give them something to think about, then they pair up and have a discussion. The pairing up hasn't been as easy with COVID. So we've sort of been doing the think and then sharing in kind of either a chat situation on Zoom or the chat feature in Google, and then going to make a continuum. And so our continuums have been in the hallway where we can stretch out. And we have a very long hallway that also has a rotunda so that we can actually go around the rotunda if we need to. So these types of things, I would have been a partisan in World War II. Right now we're reading House of the Scorpion. So we've been talking about cloning. Cloning is essential in the modern world of science. All students should go to college. Those types of questions. Recently, what's led us to the hall, we read To Build a Fire with one of my classes. And after thinking about the main character and talking about connotations, we did a continuum of, if you have positive connotations that are being brought forth from the main character, go stand at this end of the hall, negative at the other end. And so then we talked about, once we sort of grouped round, because everybody went to the negative connotation. And, you know, we were socially distancing, but we had a conversation about what in the text led you to have that negative feeling. And they had to be really specific. And I was very pleased that they could pinpoint certain moments in the story where they had developed that negative connotation. And then another one that I do with Continuum a lot is life expectancy. And we use the CIA World Factbook, and we look up life expectancies. We get into a continuum based on life expectancies, and then discuss, or they infer why they think that the life expectancy is either low or high. And then we do a deep dive into seeing if we can figure out exactly why the life expectancy in that country is either high or low. Decision making. So this piece is important in terms of having kids come up with a criteria from which a decision will be made. So which character had to overcome the most obstacles? Well, you can answer that question, but what are you going to use for criteria to get to your answer? Okay, so that's something that's a little bit deeper than just answering a question, coming up with the criteria. So sometimes, you know, teachers have kids write the questions for quizzes and tests, but this piece gets a little bit more deep for kids, and I think it's really helpful to have them do that. And then graphic organizers, again, evaluating author's reasoning. Just something simple like this that you can use. Or I use quite a bit of debate in my class, especially pre-COVID. We haven't done as much since COVID because of the closeness of how I normally structure my debates, but we'll get back there soon. So I use a template, and this one just happened to be about the 13 colonies, but you can certainly change it to whatever you like. But they have to come up with their opening statement and arguments that include details. And these are for kids who are just learning about debates in middle school. So I would be using these with like my 7th graders. And then they have to come up with a rebuttal, a second argument. And I just find with middle school that the templates are really important to help them plan for their debates. And they don't do this all at once, obviously. As the debate progresses, they're adding to this template. Another strategy that I use a lot comes from a woman named Linda Mood Bell, and it's visualization and verbalization. And I'm finding in social studies that a lot of students come to me, they don't have a tremendous amount of background in terms of especially geography. and it's hard for them to visualize places that they've never been. So we use this technique where we have them repeatedly sketch what they're picturing in their mind. And this also improves comprehension, which is how I use it in my reading class. And so whatever they're reading or listening to, they would be sketching. And I put the digital sketch pad, for a while when we were out completely and I didn't see them in person, we were using Sketchpad, and the kids would sketch on the sketch pad and then take a screenshot of it and send it to me to pass it in. So now they get to choose whether they want paper or use the sketch pad. So they continually sketch, and every time they sketch, the important piece with it is that they have to tell me, they have to verbalize what it is that they did picture in their minds. Okay, and so over time, it helps them create that story that they need in their brains in order to comprehend. And it certainly works really well in social studies too, in terms of them becoming more familiar with places and people and things. I've talked about novel in a day. Another one that kids love is retelling a story using Muppets. I know it sounds ridiculous, but my kids talk about it a lot when I have them do this. So they just go online and they use Photoshop, and they retell the story using Muppet characters in a slideshow and then present it. And they have a great time with it. But the great thing about it is that they're really able to retell the story, and they're able to have a little bit of fun along the way, but they have to think deeply about the plot of the story when they're selecting their Muppet characters. We recently did wanted posters and obituaries with our Wild Wild West unit, and that was a lot of fun. And then as much artwork as we possibly can, building models, exhibit boxes. We even all wore Edgar Allan Poe mustaches one day during a Zoom. Online resources. And I'm just gonna, these are all linked so that you can check these out on your own time. And I'm just gonna kind of go through them. These three are all free. The Stanford History Education Group, Common Lit, and EPIC. And they have wonderful free texts that you can use for your social studies classroom. And especially, well, I can't really say especially because they're all great. All three of these are amazing, and they have wonderful nonfiction texts that you can use in your classroom. So I would suggest, if you haven't checked them out, that you check those three out. Owl Eyes has some free resources, some short stories that I use. I don't use Teen Tribune a lot, but I know our science teacher uses that quite a lot for the articles that are there. The digital main library is amazing, and a couple of features, I'm sure you're all aware of the digital main library, but a couple of features that I especially would point out to you. One is called Novelist, which is a great book search right here. And what I like about it is that once you put in a title, it gives you read-alikes that kids might like based on the title or based on the author. And I found that that is really a super way for kids to select good books. And then the Gale searches here in context. This is a especially good search tool if you're doing National History Day, because the articles are all sourced. And I'm just gonna just randomly pick something here for an article. And so they have the feature where it tells you what the Lexile level is. The students can click here and it will be read to them. You can make the text bigger or smaller. You can download it. You can print it. It's got these great fast facts, colored sections, and then the source down here, it has different options. And the kids can take the sourcing here, and it really helps teach them what a proper source looks like. And you can export to all of these different things down here, Easy Bib, Google Drive.
Crystal, there's a question about what citation format do your students use? And they said, thinking about the Muppets in particular.
Yeah, that can be a problem. So for the Muppets activity, I ask them to keep track of the websites that they use, because they're using tons of pictures, and it's just not realistic for them to do a full citation each time. There are times that we certainly do full citations and are very strict about that. The Muppets activity is not one where we really do the full citations. I'll be honest about it. Newsela, and I put YouTube up because since COVID, there's a lot of teachers who have put on audiobooks, who have recorded themselves reading books and text aloud. And so you can find some really good audio sources on YouTube. And some of the websites that I use when I'm looking for good reads for kids, or good pieces of text to use with kids that are connected to social studies. If you're a member of the National Social Studies Organization, you can get the latest notable trade books that are connected to social studies. And then the next year they release the list so that everybody, even people who aren't a member, can see it. So that's the first link. And then just some read alouds. And I'm just going to click through these. If they are of interest for you, you can certainly check them out. This one is a beautiful book, Before She Was Harriet. This is a great one if you're teaching classroom community building and immigration. This is a new book that you can pre-order. I'm always looking for wonderful Wabanaki stories. It isn't quite out yet, but you are able to pre-order it. Anything Joseph Brusac writes, I absolutely love it. And this is 13 Moons on a Turtle's Back, which is a beautiful picture book. And then some of the more well-known main books for our Wabanaki studies. This is a piece about Northern Maine during World War II with the prisoner of war camps. And I do quite a lot with Henry Wadsworth Longfellow's piece and looking into whether it's historically accurate or not. And I have a couple of different picture books that we use for that. And then some Ted Lewin's books are wonderful for economics units. How Much and Market. Sacred River is just a gorgeous book about India. And I actually have a class set of Rose Blanche books that I use in my World War II book, my World War II unit. And I find that the artwork is amazing in this, as well as the symbolism. And kids really connect with this book after we've been working on that unit. That unit takes us about an entire trimester to teach. So this is just one of the pieces that I use in that. I teach about World War I as well. And so I was looking for books to use with that. And one of the books that I use is Hattie Big Sky, which is about what was going on with homesteading out in Montana during the First World War. And I was looking for resources and went to Montana's public television site and found out about the Montana Sedition Project. And if you do anything with World War I would highly recommend that you check it out. And I have a link here to censorship. So in Hattie Big Sky, there's a piece about censorship. And we also look into this Montana sedition project, which is amazing. And so one of the activities that we do is just, it's really simple, but it's amazingly powerful for kids. And I take World War I letters, and the letters that I have been using are actually British, and it's linked to that word censorship there. And I give them all a Sharpie and some extra scrap paper so that the Sharpie doesn't bleed through onto their tables. And I ask them, we talk about what kinds of things were censored, who did the censoring, and then I give them the job to be the censor with their Sharpie. And so they sit there with their letters, they read their letters, and they actually censor. And we talk about, what are you feeling as you're doing this? And when you're done, what's left of the letter? And then, that naturally leads to talking about this sedition project and what went on in Montana. There's a video that I use with that, and there's a wonderful website. And they really get to see how people were actually, the name of the video is Jailed for Our Words. And they actually get to see how people lost their First Amendment rights. And that whole unit is just really powerful for kids. But the simple act of actually becoming a censor themselves with a Sharpie, if you haven't tried that with kids, it's very powerful. And then I'll just click through some of the books that I use with kids, and I've got some links here. Lawn Boy for teaching economics. And so anything with an underline is a link to some resources. Red Kayak is an amazing moral dilemma story. We do a lot of free verse poetry, and before COVID, a lot of pass around poetry where they start with a piece of paper and add a word or a phrase, and we make poems. So there's a free verse piece that I do about the Japanese relocation camps. And we learn a lot about that. That's really engaging for kids. And Out of the Dust for the Dust Bowl, and then Witness is about Vermont and the Ku Klux Klan. We do memoirs, and the one on the left is about Louis Braille, and then the one on the right was written about World War I and how this boy adopts a raccoon, and it's about the summer when he has the raccoon. And the kids really love that this year because it talks about him becoming sick with the Spanish flu. So they got to see how a boy, and this is a true story, how a boy their age had to go through the Spanish flu epidemic. And his brother is away at war in World War I. We do Novel in a Day, which I had mentioned earlier, with several of Alan Zillow's books. A couple of main setting books, Like a Willow Tree, takes place during the Spanish flu epidemic, and kids really connected with that this year. And Wildfire is about wildfires. It's a modern twist kind of on what happened in Maine in 1947. And it's an action adventure type story. This is a trilogy, and the middle one is probably historically the most interesting because it's about 1816 with a frozen summer, where here in New England, we didn't have a month that didn't have a frost. And these are some of my favorite Great Depression era books that I use with kids. We do a lot with the gold rush, and so we read Call of the Wild and To Build a Fire. When I'm teaching about South America, I love to use Journey to the River Sea, which is set in Manaus. Here's the Opera House. Private Peaceful is a wonderful World War I book, and it's kind of a classic in Great Britain. So there are lots and lots of resources online, and the movie is an excellent movie to use in the classroom. Between Shades of Gray. I mentioned that one earlier. I put the YouTube link from the author who tells the students, and I always show that before we start, why she wrote the book and her family connections, and it makes it much more meaningful for them. Monuments Men, we're working on that right now, and so I posted my web quest that we do to kind of kick that off. So I have the book of Monuments Men that's really rich with a lot of primary sources, and then we watch the movie. Girl with the White Flag is an amazing real story of a young girl who was lost during the war in Okinawa, and she surrenders. She's tiny, like 6 or 7 years old, and she is reunited with her sisters. And she never talks about what happened until she becomes an adult, and she sees this picture of herself in a bookstore one day, and she goes on a journey to find the American photographer who took her picture. Compassionate Soldier is an amazing book. It's all nonfiction, and it's true stories about people who have showed compassion in times of war. House of the Scorpion, we're reading right now. We're doing a lot with cloning with the science teacher with that, a lot of connections to different current events that are going on with the field of science. And we also talk a lot about the drug trade and addiction when we read this book. And I'm working on a refugee unit right now. Kids really like this book. They've kind of read it individually, but I have a class set, so I'm working on building a unit right now. And what my hope is that I will break the different areas of the world up and kind of do like a novel study from those perspectives geographically. So I've talked a lot, and I'd love to hear your ideas about different books and strategies. And I think that would be helpful to our whole group to have people share some of their titles and some of the strategies that they use to teach.
If you are interested in having your video show up, I can bring you into that. If you want to participate in this discussion, just please know that if we bring you into the discussion, your video is on, that you will be recorded. So if you do have something you'd like to share with the group, either just drop it directly into the chat, or let me know in the chat that you would like to speak to the group, because I can change the settings. I can allow you to talk. So while you're thinking about that, there was a question earlier. Crystal, as somebody said, could wait till the end. They want to know, how much time do you have to teach social studies?
It varies. With my 7th and 8th graders, we're doing daily 50-minute classes. So I have 50 minutes for reading and 50 minutes for social studies, and I can integrate. So it works out to be about 100 minutes a day for 7th and 8th grade. And then for 6th grade, I have a little bit less right now because our schedule is impacted by COVID. And so for that group, I have about, I would say 75 minutes a day.
And I do want to do a quick plug since you brought this up. If you saw in the listserv this morning, the Abbey Museum on the 23rd is doing a session free to the public where they are talking about the World War II German POW camp at Indian Township in Maine, which I think was the book you were referencing, or related to the book you were referencing. So check the listserv or the Abbey Museum out for that for more information. There's a comment in here. It says, I use Soldier's Heart by Avi. It is about a young man, 15-ish years old, who joins the Civil War to get a uniform, have adventure, and earn $15 a month to send home to mom in rural Minnesota. Soldier's Heart is the name that PTSD was first given. It parallels well with the Civil War in Maine. Somebody earlier had said for a book recommendation, A Long Way from Chicago by Richard Peck is absolutely hilarious. A question, the slides to the workshop will show up on the website with the video as well. List of books in the chat. It says We Love Lawn Boy for Economics. Some other great title is Follow the Money by Lauren Leedy, and Round the Money Goes, What Money Is and How We Use It by Melvin Berger. So some other book recommendations being shared. And I will drop if people are still thinking. I did update, the videos are still waiting to show up. But there is a holding place now for the video that does include the presentation. If you scroll down on the professional learning page. Other questions, thoughts, comments from the group? Anybody willing or interested in being allowed to talk, to contribute?
I just looked up the visual for that poster, and it came from teachersdiscovery.com.
And I forgot to tell you, I kept digging. I did eventually find it. So I did share that link out to the participants. Other thoughts or questions from anybody? And of course, my well-laid plans, I had the, there it is. There's the link for that. Any last questions for Crystal before we, okay. Says, can you please tell me more about the nitty-gritty of a novel in a day, please?
Okay. So I usually start by planning it out myself with taking a piece of paper and kind of charting what I want to do with it. And I try to match the student's personality with whatever chapter I give them in the book. So there's quite a bit of thought that goes into that. And I sort of plan it out on a piece of paper and then I type it up. And what it looks like is a column that has the student's name and then the pages that they are responsible for. And I've been doing this with the Alan Zillow pieces, and they have individual chapters for certain people or events. So they get that up front and they know who they're going to be or what they're going to be responsible for. And then as a whole class, we read together the introduction. And then I teach, use direct instruction to not only share that introduction with them, but to give them the historical background and the connections to geography and civics and government and economics that they need before we even start. And then they are given time after that. And that usually takes 2 or 3 days. And then after that, they're assigned their piece. And I remind them that, you know, that we are a community and that they have to contribute their knowledge, that everybody's counting on them to get a full story here. So they go off and they do their reading and their research. And the Zillow books are really great because they lend themselves to topics that are really accessible online. So for example, the people that are in the Young Survivors of the Titanic, they're all people that have multiple interviews online that kids can access and multiple places where kids can look at primary sources from those people who survived the Titanic. And the same is true for the Partisan book and the Civil Rights Leaders book. So kids can easily do research that's based in historical fact, that's accurate, that includes primary sources. So they have, I would say, about 3 days to do that piece to prepare. And then what I have them do is to retell the story. They have to use a PowerPoint with some, or a slideshow with some primary sources to show the rest of us. and they have to practice telling us the story. We do that ahead of time. And then they retell what they read to the class. So I would say that in all, it's going to take probably about 7 or 8 class periods or days to do this. So a good novel in a day isn't a day, it's more like 2 weeks.
Some other books that people are talking about: On the Same Day in March, A Tour of the World's Weather by Marlon Singer. And the I Survived series has come out with graphic novels. They have one called I Survived the Nazi Invasion 1944. They said kids love the graphic novels and I Survived, so I look forward to checking it out. Other thoughts, ideas, suggestions, questions that you'd like to share? Oh, my apologies. Faith, let me get a new certificate printed up. So don't go anywhere at the end. It'll take me just a second. I entered in the wrong date. There's another book listed, They Call Me Enemy by George Takei and The Bridge. Crystal, we should grab all these books out of the chat here. I see you writing them down. We could put together a new book list. Does anybody have a question for Crystal that'll take long enough to let me bounce over to go update the certificate since I made a mistake on the first one? Crystal, can you see the chat to read through the?
Yes, I can.
Okay, I'm going to turn it over to you for just a second.
Okay, sounds good. I'm just reading all these wonderful books here. So there's a question about the slideshow. Joe is going to put that up so that you can, he's going to post that so that you can use the links if you'd like. And if you have any questions or you need any templates, or if you're, like your question about novel in a day, I have different templates that I use for those things. So just feel free to email me and reach out, and I would be glad to share those with you in a Google Doc so that you can use them in your Google Classroom.
In the chat, I can drop, here's the link to the presentation on the DOE site. Quick pull that. Well, the certificate is processing. My apologies for putting the wrong year on that, everybody. If there are no further questions, we can go ahead and end the recording and open up an informal discussion while I'm waiting for this. Oh, here we go. Here's the updated form. And again, my apologies for putting in the wrong date. Last call for any questions for Crystal while we're still recording. Well, Crystal, I will give you the formal thank you for us to end the recording. Thank you, as always. There's so many books. I don't know where you find the time to read them all. So thank you for sharing. Thank you for making all those connections. And thank you to everybody for all of the questions and engagement in both the chat and the Q&A.